Hello and welcome. I'm Matthew Fox,
I'm Eric Lankford.
and this is This Week at the Movies. You are joining us for the debut episode. We are eventually going to be doing this on a weekly basis, but for the time being, we're going to launch today with a little bit about the show and about some of our favorite movies. Then we'll be back Labor Day weekend with our favorites of summer. Be back in October with some of our favorite scary movies. And then just to give you a full fright, we'll be back Thanksgiving weekend weekly. So, Eric, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing fantastic. Matthew, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm excited
Living
to
well.
jump in and talk a little bit about the movie. So,
Me too.
every week you'll be seeing that this will be a film party. So, you can actually follow us on Twitter at
Oh yeah.
Weekly Film Party. Um, kind of a good inspiration for the show for me. One of the things that always drew me into loving film was as a younger person watching Siskel and Ebert, and they're at the movies. I don't think it was officially the end of the weekend until Sunday nights. I popped them on and heard what they had to say from the balcony, going back and forth. And
Mm-hmm.
I've long enjoyed discussing films with Eric, and asked him if he would take this journey with me.
Yeah, I think we've been on a couple of podcasts associated with the Music City Drive-In, namely the Music City Drive-In podcast. And to tell you what, some of the most enjoyable parts of that has been our discussions. I always tried to sneak my way in and talk a little more in depth, even when we're just naming titles of movies and things. And yeah, I'm excited to get to do a little bit more of this.
Yeah, so every week we will be looking at a couple of films. We'll be looking at a couple of new films that we saw as we're going forward, and then we will be doing some throwback films. As we're doing some of our special shows, we'll be leaning a little bit more into the throwback films, but I can't wait to look at some of those. We're going to adopt a familiar scoring system. We're going to use our thumbs.
Yep, out of respect, we're going to be doing a 4 thumbs up system rather than a 2 thumbs up system because my brain works weird where I think of 2 thumbs up and I just picture Ebert with 2 thumbs up and I'm like, hey, they have 4 thumbs. So, yeah.
Yeah, so if I give it 2 thumbs up, that was my highest one. Still liked it. Medium, it was okay. Not great. Avoid at all costs.
Yep. You can kind of think of it as like a 5, 4, 3, 2, 0, like 1, 0. Yeah.
And if we are like John JPP and blow our hand off, then it was a really bad movie.
Right, yeah. Just a stump. Just yeah.
So I'm hoping this will be kind of a fun time for everyone. Where we get to explore movies and share some laughs and get some recommendations. What about you, Eric?
See, this is the benefit of doing this now. I think it's fun to revisit just a very simple premise. For a review show, Siskel and Ebert, the way they dove into movies, they had 20 minutes of screen time to dig in and explore what a movie is and what they thought about it and felt about it and keep moving. And they were working actively on the side. But in 2022, you guys can join the conversation and pick at things and poke at us and all that kind of stuff. And I love the concept of coming back to that format and doing that. I've loved movies since I have at least canon evidence of me when I was about 4 years old dressing as Peter Pan for a solid week and running around my front yard and Luke Skywalker and all that. In fact, some of the first movies I saw, and I wanted to ask you this, was when A New Hope was re-released in 97.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some of my earliest vivid experiences is Disney's Tarzan and The Lord of the Rings are some of the biggest theatrical experiences I remember. And I was curious, what are the biggest first memories you have?
Yeah, I think, one of my early ones, which remains a personal favorite, is The Cup.
Just getting a re-release soon.
Jaws. It's not really 4th of July for me until I've watched Joey Chestnut consume his body weight in hot dogs, and then Jaws consume its body weight in dumb Islanders.
Yeah.
However, but so Jaws was always one. Star Wars, I can remember watching, especially Empire and Return of the Jedi, and pulling out my GI Joes and setting up the giant, a combination of GI Joes, Star Trek figures, and Star Wars figures, because at the
Absolutely.
time it was okay for all those things to commingle to
what is
fight
canon?
battles. What is canon?
Yeah. The characters weren't even who they are. You just stand them up and it's like, this one's the hero and this one is the person, and they could just come up with a thing in your head. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm looking forward to our October show. I know my mom will as well, because one of the ones that I picked on there as a personal favorite was a film that she dropped on me, which I'll tell more about later. But that one's kind of always stuck with me. But I think Jaws, Star Wars, some of the movies that are still favorites today. I think, I've heard people, I was born in 1981. I've heard people who were born in the 70s talk about that first experiencing Star Wars on the big screen as kind of that seminal, wow, movies can do this. I think for me, it was seeing Jurassic Park. I was 12 years old when the original Jurassic Park, and I remember just going, and that, there you go. That moment when Dr. Grant and Dr. Sattler get out of the Jeeps and it pulls back and you see the Brontosaurus, and it's just this wow moment. I had my mom buy me the book, and fortunately she didn't pre-screen it, because I don't know if that was a book that was Michael Crichton aimed at 12-year-olds, but it started a love affair with Michael Crichton and films. But do you have one of those kind of wow moments?
See, my relationship with film is so weird, because when growing up, I was born in 91. So, it's one of those things that you grow up in the middle of blockbuster season where everybody sees it kind of just as entertainment, and nobody, around where I live sees it as something. It's like, well, let's go actively pursue a career. Ironic, because Atlanta is now like the third New York and Hollywood and whatnot. But,
I know Atlanta and Vancouver are where almost everything gets produced now.
Yeah. So it's just, to me, I think one of the biggest movies that struck me in a way that it was in between something that is art and something that is commercial is Inception. Seeing that at the midnight premiere, I've had this long-standing crusade of confusion where everyone sees the top spinning at the end and automatically assumes that that is an invitation to consider whether things that happen in the movie happened or not. But to me, that top was such a profound visual that just, like, for one brief second takes you away from the core character story and makes you think, look how powerful the ideas that we listen to are and how powerful stories can be. And then it's like, whoop, cut to black. And ever since then, it's just been like, yeah, stories have been my whole life. Storytelling, like, and particularly in movies, have been the most moving, crazy experiences where I always use them to relate to people. I mark relationships with, like, when I've seen what movies with people. It's one of those things where you don't really realize how important it is to you until you do. And then life, try to incorporate as much of that into your life as you can. So.
Yeah, and one of the things we're going to do in this first episode is we thought if you're going to take this journey with us and listen to us talk about movies, we'd help you get to know us a little bit by sharing a little bit of our background, what makes us passionate about films, and then each of us are going to share our favorite film. Because I know that's always a question that gets asked. I don't know about you, since I love movies so much. When people ask that, I mean, I do have the number one, which obviously
headache, a stress headache.
Yeah, you feel. I'm like, can I narrow it down to 50? Is that acceptable? If you guys,
what you're doing in your list, yeah, I love that list. By the way, if you don't follow Matt's blog, you absolutely should, because some of just the perfect amount of notes of why some movies hit and resonate. I think the first one you posted was 10 Things I Hate About You.
Yeah, that was back down in there. That was either 49 or 48. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious though. We are going to talk about our number one today. Does that mean we're getting like a preview for people who watch this?
Indeed.
Okay.
But you know, I think currently I have my number ones either scheduled to drop Christmas week or New Year's week. And I literally planned it out to where it would be 52 weeks.
Okay.
I have
Oh
dates and
wow.
stuff in
Okay.
there. So yeah, I've been going through my top movies and TV this year, and then next year, which actually will end up being part of the show. I'm going to count down my top 50 films of the 1970s, which we are going to talk about. I'm also going to do on Saturdays my top 50 superhero films of all time.
Oh yeah.
So I've been cultivating.
We're there.
I mean, you get almost 50 a year now. That's what's been hard, you know, waiting to see some of the ones that come out and does that tweak or whatever. For me, I guess I've always kind of loved film, as I talked about the seminal moments. But when I went to school, I went as a broadcast journalism major at Biola University, which is the Biblical Institute of Los Angeles. So as a radio, television, and film major, you do all kinds of things. And it was a film theory class that I took with one of my professors, Dr. Parham, that just kind of made me think about movies in a different way. That was he brought in clips of all these things I'd never seen, and we'd talk about all these different movies. And every week when I was in college, I would probably go. I set my schedule up so I never had to go on Fridays. Fridays I would go to the theater and I would see 1 to 4 films depending on how much was out that I wanted. But then I would also go to video stores. Now, kids, these are things where you could go and they'd have millions of copies of videos or DVDs. I would pick a genre. I would pick a letter of the alphabet, and my roommate and I would pick 8 to 10 things we hadn't seen and stack them up. And that was probably where I started deep diving through my cinema education. Sometimes out of that film theory class, I would get ones that I wanted to go. That was where I kind of developed my love for the Coen brothers, because one of the first movies he looked at in film theory was clips out of Barton Fink, which, if you've never seen that, the cinematography and some of the choices they use for storytelling is masterful. But I went through all of like 1990s Coen brothers. And even though one of their more recent films is one of my all-time favorites, 1990s Coen Brothers was probably the zenith of their some of the creative choices and things they made. That was how I first discovered Miller's Crossing, which is another movie that's in my list. So I've kind of kept that up. You know, I go to the theater. That's like my special place. You know, if I'm in a place in my life where I'm so busy that I can't go, I know I'm starting to get emotionally out of balance, because I just love to go and to still, to me, the magic of the theater where you just put everything aside and get drawn in to the world of story. You know, if you guys follow me on Letterboxd, I've rated and reviewed almost 7,000 films now, and it's just become a real passion. How about you, Eric?
So, you know, you mentioned video stores, and honestly, by the time I had what you could quote unquote call expendable income, the year was 2009. And when I got into a pattern where I could do,
if only you'd gotten there earlier, Blockbuster would still be alive.
About 2 years into that, it became a Shane's Rib Shack. So, you know, I still go there, and I still think, man, where I'm sitting used to be like the horror aisle, you know? And we would just love, like, it's so odd now. I think of some movie titles, and you see the posters and images, and I think like of that feeling of like walking through like a carpeted establishment and like looking at a rack of all face front titles and just seeing what grabbed your attention and like exploring something new. And now I'm still watching movies that I don't realize, oh, this is that movie. You know, like seeing I almost iconic Brain Dead, the cover for that, with the woman's mouth open with the eyes in it. Or I don't know if it's called Dead Alive in the US or Brain Dead, but either way, I finally saw it. Man, that movie's hilarious. You know, so I knew I wanted to do something, but I wasn't sure how committed I could be to it for one reason or another. And so I minored in film studies at the University of Georgia. I studied film history primarily and writing. So I never really quite took cinematography classes, but I snuck back in here a short film that I helped write and produce and direct a tiny bit called The Love Monster. And then oddly enough, the reason I'm here, one of the reasons I'm here, I don't think I would be here if it weren't for an app called Rizzle, where I met Ricky Valero, who people watching this are generally going to know. And on Rizzle, I made this silly 10-minute short, 1 minute at a time, about vampires. And we won that contest. So, it's one of those things, like, just filmmaking in general. Like, this is Chungking Express, one of the movies that I saw because of school, that just kind of smacked me across the face and changed, like, a lot of the way that I watch movies. And I don't even know where to direct this other than just to say, yeah, like, everything from rewinding and rewatching bits of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade as a 10-year-old up to just leaving the theater like a few hours ago watching Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. Like, there's never an experience not worth talking about or engaging with someone. Like, even some of the worst movies I've experienced where I feel like there was no value added at all to my life still gave me a chance to engage in exactly what you're talking about, where you sit and for a few moments you're transported into something and it means something to you, even though it's just a compilation of images and sounds for an hour and a half or more.
I think at some point in time, everyone that gets involved in film criticism has worked on making movies too. I remember in college we had to make one, and you don't think about it at the time, but they put us into groups, and the script that the guy that was our director chose took place entirely at night.
Great for commercial.
For 3 months of weekends, every weekend night, you have to go out there and shoot. And I'm like, I don't even want to watch this movie anymore, because all I could think was every Friday and Saturday night you're shooting from like 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. in and around these apartments, and then editing. I quickly realized I love screenwriting, I love storytelling, I love watching the finished product. But being on a set and the making and how long it takes to get shots.
Tough. So editing. Okay. I have, like, my entire adult life been fan editing. So I'll take a movie that I just wish was a little different for some reason and work on it. And I've done, like, I brought this up in an old podcast. I've done The Hobbit into one extended movie. I've done
which, let's be honest, it's a shorter book. It could have been 1 3-hour movie and actually been really
works
good.
Yeah,
being 3-hour movies, I have other questions.
Yep. I've done the Star Wars prequels. One of the most interesting ones that I think worked was I did a weird fan edit of the Max Payne movie with Mark Wahlberg using music, it's like score from the games, and reworking the structure of it so that you would flash back to the past in more of a high contrast, black and white, and come back to the present and make that story more of a maze. I don't know. There's just so much. I do have a lot of fun with the process. I don't think there's any part of the process I haven't been like, yeah, I could do this like 40 hours a week plus, whatever, like 80 hours a week. I know people work crazy hours doing the movies and stuff. And I have a friend that causes me to catch things in my throat sometimes. Like, I can say this now. The Daredevil suit is yellow. That's going to be on Netflix, right? That seems like a way out of the way thing. But the reason I bring that up is I have a friend who works on the costume union that works primarily for Marvel in Atlanta. Now, this person, I don't remember them having a crazy passion for movies, but I remember them having a crazy passion for comic books and art. And it seems like everyone around me, everyone is affected one way or another and just kind of moves this direction. So I just seeing everyone get passionate about it and having it be a real part of my life at all is just fantastic, which, again, I owe you a thank you for, bringing me here. So, yeah.
Well, a big part of what we're going to do with these episodes is we want to keep it a tight half hour. You know,
Yep.
Siskel and Ebert, they got their thumbs out, they got their arguments in, they got their popcorn, and 29 minutes later, you were ready to go out and rock it at the movies. So before we leave, we wanted to take a chance to go over our favorite films of all time. And so I will go first. Um, and I'm going to share a little bit about mine and some of the reasons I like it. And then Eric actually recently saw it, so he's ready to go. And then he will give his, and I'll give some thoughts. But my movie is A Time to Kill, and it has been my personal most favorite movie for probably a little over 20 years.
Did you see it in a theater?
I did not.
Okay.
I did not see it in a theater, but for those of you that aren't familiar, Time to Kill was directed by Joel Schumacher, who very shortly after that went on to ruin Batman. But he will be forgiven for me because this movie stars Matthew McConaughey, Samuel L. Jackson, Sandra Bullock, Ashley Judd, Donald and Kiefer Sutherland, Oliver Platt. It's just a loaded cast. Kevin Spacey. We have to mention he's in there now for whole other reasons.
Yeah.
But it is based on a John Grisham novel. And John Grisham's is actually a lawyer. He was a trial lawyer before he started getting into writing. And one day when he was in court, he was sitting there watching the trial of watching a rape trial. Where the person was accused of raping a young girl. And he thought to himself, what would I do if that happened to my daughter? And that eventually inspired his idea for A Time to Kill, which takes a hard look at a whole bunch of issues. I would say it's at the time, it felt like kind of a natural modern follow-up to Kill a Mockingbird. We've seen a couple of different kinds of looks at that kind of justice and race relations in the South. He wrote the book, he sent it in, and nobody was interested. So he actually later wrote The Firm, and that kind of got picked up and that got made into a movie with Tom Cruise. And it was so popular that they were like, hey, do you have anything else? More? And he's like, actually, I have my first novel, which is A Time to Kill. So I guess we can thank Tom Cruise for getting A Time to Kill. And I think Wilford Brimley's in The Firm. So, I thank him for my oatmeal. I thank him for A Time to Kill. But what has always spoken to me is the story. And it is not an easy story. It's about a young African-American girl who is on her way home from the grocery store and is assaulted by two kind of vile hillbilly guys.
One of whom is
Nikki Cate.
Percy from the Green Mile.
Oh, yeah, Percy from the Green Mile. Yes. So that guy he has a type, we'll say.
No kidding.
Anyway, Samuel L. Jackson plays her father, and it becomes sort of clear / he's worried that they are going to be set free because of the nature of justice they're in Mississippi. And I think the novel was set in the 80s.
Makes sense.
So he felt like there was a chance they were going to be set free, and that wasn't okay with him. And when they're coming into court on the verge of going to their own trial, he hides himself away, pops out, and kills them. So the film is really about his trial. And Matthew McConaughey plays a young lawyer named Jake Brigance, who has his own family, who takes on the task of defending him in this very big trial. And there's a few things that I love about the movie. There's probably the first thing for me is it's one of the rare movies that shows puts a value on fidelity in marriage. Matthew McConaughey is married to Ashley Judd in the movie, but Sandra Bullock is a young law student who's working with him, and Matthew McConaughey's character goes through some things where his marriage isn't in a great place, and he's given an opportunity to have an affair, and he does not, and he makes things right with his wife. And people may say that's a small thing, but I don't think that's a concept that gets portrayed that often, and it's something that's always stuck with me. It takes a very hard look at race relations. and it doesn't. I don't think it takes anything easy. It shows that there are issues on both sides, especially as it comes, Carl Lee as he goes through his trial process. You see people on both sides, adding fuel to the fire. There's actually race riots outside, and it's not. I think the film does a nice job of not portraying it all as one-sided, but portraying the idea that hate is a slippery slope that leads everybody into conflict. And then it takes a hard look at the notion of justice. And I'll be honest, I 100% disagree with the verdict that is overturned, that is presented in the film. I don't believe it to be justice, but the film, I have probably seen it almost 100 times, and I never fail to break down in tears when Matthew McConaughey gives his closing statement. But what, you got a chance to see it? What stood out to you?
So, like you were saying, one of the most powerful things about it is the way that it guts and wears so many of its themes on its sleeve, which a lot of people who might watch it today might think the movie is a little heavy-handed, I think. I mean, you think about the crowd outside, you literally have people saying, set him free or make him fry, and they're shouting and competing in volume. And there's not that many people not on either wearing a KKK hood or their skin is black. It's very divided and clear and upfront and straightforward about its message. But when you think about when this came out, which was 98, I believe?
96.
96. It's a time when you had to scream loud and be clear. And I feel like it's so important. So many things. The Samuel L. Jackson and Matthew McConaughey are like powerhouses through this whole thing. And even Sandra Bullock, like you mentioned, the way that she's able to stand up for her values through this and play another part in that, and then play this role in Matthew McConaughey's life where she manages to not be a seductress, even though there's this chemistry between them. They touch on this just enough. They have this be just a big enough part of his life to not detract from the bigger, conflicts in the movie. And I thought it was absolutely fantastic. It blew me away. It was so hard to stomach sometimes, but that's so the point. And I gotta disagree with you about the verdict, because I can understand what you're saying, that the verdict technically is, inaccurate, and it is true. But I think, in any like real law case, if, the whole movie, Kevin Spacey is calling him and objecting to all these appeals to emotion because they're not countering the facts of the case. And in the end, it's just a big appeal to emotion, or so you could write it off. But I think the idea here is to, my brain is doing the post-COVID thing. It's 2022, and I almost lost that for a second.
Well, it is. You're all right. The entire thing is about jury nullification.
Kind of, yes. But also at the same time, I feel like it's about the consequences of our action and where we draw the line between being in control and not being in control of ourselves. I think there's so many times where Matthew McConaughey is pushed into whether he would or would not be in control of himself. And then they present this other opportunity. Will you be unfaithful or not? Well, he has control over that, but he doesn't here. And it's just this dividing line where I think he drives the jury to ask themselves, would you behave in a sane manner in this situation? And that's the big question that you sort of have to answer for yourself, is if you were in that jury box, would you consider yourself, I would react in a sane manner to that situation, or I would react not in a sane manner? And so that's kind of, it's left up to the jury to decide, and it's left up to the viewer to decide. So I can't say whether I disagree or agree, because I'm not sure what the deliberation is of the jury. I kind of want a whole sequel of 12 Angry Men, like remade, to sit in that room as a companion to this, to have people break it down. But,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it makes you think, and it gets you in the heart. You picked a movie as your favorite movie that I have to say I dearly love as well. So why don't you take off?
I adore this. It was so hard to pick. So, I'm sneaking in movies that I love, into the background here. But I ultimately chose Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, a movie that I first saw accidentally passing my television like in our house when I was younger. where Robert Downey Jr. is standing in a bathroom and turns, and there's a corpse in a bathtub.
That
And
is the scene.
I was sucked in. I couldn't believe what I was watching. For one, for cable television to be pulling off some of what they're pulling off. But shortly thereafter, here's Val Kilmer, a homosexual detective, helping him toss the body from the roof of a hotel. And I'm just so engaged. Written and directed by Shane Black with an unbelievable score by John Ottman. This movie, I hunted this down. This is the first Blu-ray I ever bought. And that's ultimately why I picked it. And this is because, you know, that was a new format at the time and whatnot. And I just saw this and was like, that's the movie from the TV that I never saw the whole thing. And there are so many details I want to go in, but I just, in short, it's a story being told by a flawed character, and that's played so perfectly. And it's just twofold mysteries that get pulled in, where Robert Downey Jr. is supposed to be taught to be an actor who's playing a detective by Val Kilmer. Even that is a facade, but it would take forever to just watch the movie. You know, it's a story that unfolds the way it does on purpose. There's so much humor and so much heart and so much grit that is just kind of like brushed over. And it's fantastic the way that this movie unfolds and the way that it's told. Shane Black is, I think, an incredible director and writer, no matter what the Predator is. You know, and it's just, I think they managed to dance around Val Kilmer playing a homosexual character without using that as some sort of joke, even though the characters are playing off of one another and using it as a joke. It's like between them. And just Robert Downey Jr. wrapped up in a murder mystery, and he's narrating the whole time. Like, what else can I tell you, you know?
He's got such a natural gift with comedy. And for those of you that have seen it, Shane Black actually is the original creator of Lethal Weapon. And I've always enjoyed the Lethal Weapon movies. So I, unlike you who stumbled on it in cable, I was actually excited, read about it in my Entertainment Weekly because I was out of college by then. And I remember seeing it in the theater. I'm pretty sure I saw it with my mother in the theater because she used to be my movie-going buddy sometimes. And you're right, that scene where he's just standing there and he's peeing and he notices a body and like accidentally rolls over and doesn't stop the stream. And then later Val Kilmer, why did you pee on it? Yeah. I don't think
Can they get like DNA from that?
And it's a Christmas movie. You forgot the best part. A lot of Shane Black, a lot of his movies are these kind of Christmas.
The whole thing.
The original Lethal Weapon's a Christmas movie.
Yep, Iron Man is the only MCU Christmas movie. 3. Robert Downey Jr. is really just a criminal trying to steal a Christmas present for his kid, and then he gets accidentally cast. Like it's a whole thing. You know what? The thing I love the most about Shane Black's storytelling that's in this is this notion that you are like 2/3 of the way through this movie and you're expecting a traditional structure, and 2 characters are having a conversation and a stereotypical beat comes and the door gets slammed in his face, but then they have to open the door because she has to ask, did I just cut your finger off? He's like, yeah, I'm trying not to look at it, it's there on the ground. And you have to sidetrack the whole story to go get his finger reattached, and that's something they have to deal with now. Like, that is not needed for the movie at all, but it makes it so much better. I love that movie.
Well, it's good performance from Michelle Monaghan. It was one of the early movies I think I remember seeing with her. And I think it's actually one of Val Kilmer's better performances. It was so surprising, you know, and it comes at a different time. The movie dropped, I think it was 2006. 2005, yeah. So a little bit kind of later after that first wave of his, you know, Top Gun kind of Willow career, seeing him in there. And it's Robert Downey Jr. Just has such a gift for some of these parts. I actually watched another movie that dropped from that year this weekend, that Good Night and Good Luck. And you just see Robert Downey Jr., his range with things. He can be incredibly serious. He can be funny. You see all those things kind of come together in Iron Man. I just want people to go back and remember a time before he was Iron Man and appreciate some of like that full body of work, some of the amazing work that he did early.
Yeah, and especially there's this little quiet period right when he's beginning to rebuild his career, and there's so much there to enjoy. Like, absolutely.
Well, those are a couple of our personal favorites. As we said, we hope that you have enjoyed, and we'll be back. We will be back on Labor Day weekend, looking at each of us picking a couple of our favorite films from summer, and just be prepared. They won't all be blockbusters because we have a wide range of film interests, as this show will show as we're going through, and probably as you've already gathered from our two choices for favorite film. So until then, make sure to follow Eric. Where can they follow you?
At High Contrast FLM at Twitter, and you can pretty much find all of my social media links from there.
And I am at Nighthawk7734 on Twitter, and you can follow the show at Weekly Film Party. You can follow us there, or on Instagram, or on our own YouTube channel. Until next time, the film room is closed.